My straight best friend grabbed my hand during graduation. I wasn't ready. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, it is free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic and emotional stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us go back to our main character. Sometimes the bravest love story begins with a single hand that refuses to let go. The morning of graduation arrived wrapped in warm June sunlight, the kind that painted every brick building on campus with a soft golden glow and made everything feel like the ending of a movie. No one wanted to leave. Families filled the football field with folding chairs. Balloons floated above excited crowds. Cameras flashed from every direction. And somewhere behind the speakers, the marching band struggled through one last rehearsal. Everyone around me looked like they belonged inside the happiest day of their lives. I smiled when people looked my way. I laughed when someone congratulated me. I even adjusted my graduation cap 3 separate times just to keep my hands busy. The truth was, I had spent 4 years preparing for this ceremony and almost no time preparing for what came after it. Because after today, Noah Bennett was leaving for Seattle. A dream engineering job, a brand new apartment, a future he had worked unbelievably hard to earn. I was proud of him. God, I was so proud that it almost hurt. But pride and heartbreak can live inside the same chest without asking each other for permission. Noah had been my best friend since freshman orientation, when he accidentally stole my backpack because we owned the exact same navy blue one. He spent 20 minutes apologizing before buying me a coffee that tasted terrible, and somehow we had been inseparable ever since. 4 years of late-night study sessions, terrible frozen pizza, road trips that always took wrong turns, football games we barely watched because we talked through every quarter, and enough inside jokes that neither of us could explain them to anyone else anymore. Everyone called us a package deal. They assumed we would stay friends forever. They had no idea how carefully I had hidden the biggest truth of my life behind every casual laugh. I loved him, not for a week, not for a semester. I had loved him quietly for almost 3 years. I had buried it beneath homework, birthdays, movie nights, Thanksgiving dinners with his family, and countless reminders that Noah was straight. At least that was what everyone believed, including me. Loving him had become less like chasing hope and more like carrying a secret that grew heavier every year. So I made myself one promise before graduation arrived. Today would be my goodbye, not to Noah, but to the impossible version of us that only existed inside my imagination. I would cheer when his name was called. We would hug for pictures. We would promise to visit. Then life would move forward exactly the way it was supposed to. Some stories, I told myself, were never meant to become love stories. A roar of applause erupted as another row of graduates crossed the stage. I glanced toward Noah, standing only a few feet away in his blue gown, sunlight catching the edge of his smile as he joked with the guy beside him. He looked completely relaxed, completely certain about tomorrow. Then, almost as if he felt me staring, he turned his head. Our eyes met across the line of graduates. He smiled. Not the polite smile people wear for photos, but the small crooked one that had always felt like it belonged only to me. My heart betrayed me with one familiar ache. I looked away first because that was what I had taught myself to do. I could survive one more day pretending everything was normal. I just didn't know that before the ceremony ended. One simple gesture would quietly unravel every lie I had spent years telling myself. The university president stepped toward the microphone, thanked every family who had traveled across the country, and officially declared the graduating class complete. The stadium erupted into cheers so loud that the words dissolved into pure celebration. Hundreds of blue caps shot into the bright afternoon sky like startled birds before drifting back down through waves of laughter and applause. I barely noticed any of it. My attention stayed fixed on Noah as everyone around us began hugging classmates, taking pictures, and searching for their families in the crowded stands. Someone bumped my shoulder from behind, pushing me a step forward into the flow of excited graduates. Another person squeezed past carrying an armful of flowers nearly the size of a small child. The crowd moved like a river, impossible to predict and even harder to escape. I tried to laugh at the chaos until another shove came from my left, stronger this time, throwing me slightly off balance. Before I could steady myself, warm fingers wrapped firmly around my hand. Not my wrist, not my sleeve, my hand. My breath caught so suddenly that it almost hurt. Noah did not even look at me at first. He simply tightened his grip with quiet certainty and guided me through the crowd as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His hand was warm from standing under the summer sun, his fingers comfortably woven around mine, steady enough to keep me from stumbling every time another graduate brushed past us. Everything else became strangely quiet. The cheers faded. The band disappeared beneath the sound of my own heartbeat. I stared at our joined hands like my brain had forgotten how to understand what my eyes were seeing. Surely this was practical. Surely he was just making sure we did not get separated. Friends did things like that, did not they? Best friends looked out for each other. Best friends stayed close. Best friends held hands? My thoughts crashed into one another so quickly that none of them made any sense. I told myself not to read too much into it. I told myself he would let go in another second. Then another second passed. Then another. He still did not let go. We reached the open walkway beside the football field where the crowd finally spread out, giving everyone room to breathe. There was no longer any reason to keep holding on. Yet Noah continued walking beside me with the same calm expression, his thumb shifting almost absent-mindedly against the side of my hand as if he had forgotten he was doing it. I felt warmth rush into my face. Do not panic, Adrian. Do not ruin this. Do not make it weird. I opened my mouth twice before managing to speak. You know, I said with a nervous laugh that sounded completely unlike me, I think we survived graduation. Noah looked over, sunlight catching the pale green in his eyes, and smiled that familiar crooked smile. I told you we would. His voice was relaxed, almost amused. Then his gaze finally dropped to our hands. For the first time all afternoon, he seemed to notice what he was doing. His expression flickered with something I could not name. Surprise. Confusion. Maybe even hesitation. My heart prepared itself for the awkward apology that would surely follow. I expected him to pull away immediately, scratch the back of his neck, laugh it off and say he had not realized. Instead, he looked back at me, his fingers tightening ever so slightly for one impossible heartbeat before he slowly let go. The absence of his hand felt strangely colder than the warm June air should have allowed, and somehow that tiny moment lingered longer than the entire graduation ceremony itself. The rest of graduation passed in a blur that refused to settle into a single clear memory. I smiled for photographs I barely remembered taking. I shook hands with professors whose names suddenly escaped me. I hugged classmates while my mind replayed the same impossible moment over and over again. Noah had held my hand. Not for a split second. Not because he had tripped. Long enough for me to notice the warmth, the quiet confidence, and the strange reluctance when he finally let go. By the time we found our families outside the stadium, I had already rewritten the story in my head at least 20 different ways. Maybe he had simply been trying to help me through the crowd. Maybe everyone had been grabbing someone. Maybe I had imagined the way his fingers tightened just before he released mine. The human brain was remarkably talented at creating hope where none existed, and mine deserved an award. Noah, meanwhile, acted exactly like Noah. He greeted my parents with his usual easy smile, thanked my mother for bringing homemade cookies, laughed with my younger sister about the embarrassing photos she insisted on taking, and somehow managed to make every conversation feel effortless. If anything unusual had happened between us, he gave no sign of it. That almost made it worse. I found myself studying every expression on his face like a detective searching for evidence that probably was not there. Was he avoiding eye contact? No. Was he standing a little closer than usual? Maybe. Did he seem nervous? Absolutely not. He looked comfortable enough to convince me I had invented the entire thing. We spent nearly an hour taking family pictures beneath the old oak tree near the administration building. the same tree where incoming freshmen had gathered 4 years earlier, pretending they were not terrified of starting college. Time had a funny sense of humor. It brought you back to familiar places just to remind you how different you had become. Eventually, our families wandered toward the parking lot, talking about dinner reservations and travel plans. Noah and I stayed behind to carry a few boxes from the student center where we had cleaned out our campus organization office earlier that week. The walk across campus felt strangely quieter than usual. Summer had already begun its slow takeover. The sidewalks that normally buzzed with students were almost empty now, scattered with forgotten flyers and a few blue graduation programs dancing across the pavement whenever the breeze picked up. I wanted to ask him about the hand. I almost did. 3 separate times the words reached the edge of my tongue before fear gently pushed them back down again. What was I supposed to say? Why did you hold my hand? That sounded ridiculous the moment I imagined it out loud. Instead, I commented on the weather. I pointed out a squirrel stealing part of someone's picnic. I laughed at absolutely nothing. Noah laughed too, but every now and then I caught him glancing at me with an unreadable expression, as though he wanted to say something and kept deciding against it. By late afternoon, we reached our old apartment building one last time. Cardboard boxes filled the living room. His suitcase stood beside the couch, already zipped. Seattle suddenly felt less like a city and more like a countdown. Tomorrow morning he would drive away, and whatever that moment on the football field had meant would probably disappear with him. I stood there surrounded by packed memories, telling myself that some questions were safer left unanswered. Even so, a quiet voice deep inside refused to let the matter rest. Because if that simple touch had truly meant nothing, then why was I the only one pretending it never happened while Noah looked like he was carrying a secret just as heavy as mine? That evening the apartment felt bigger than it had ever felt before, as if every packed box had quietly carried away another piece of the life we had built together. The shelves that once overflowed with textbooks, coffee mugs, and ridiculous souvenirs from weekend road trips now stood almost empty, leaving pale rectangles on the walls where photographs had hung for years. I sat on the living room floor pretending to organize my own things, but I had not actually packed anything in nearly 20 minutes. My hands moved. My mind did not. It kept wandering back to the football field, back to that impossible moment when Noah had reached for me without hesitation. The more I tried to dismiss it, the more stubbornly it returned. Finally, I gave up arguing with myself and let my memory speak instead. Funny thing about love. It rarely announces itself with fireworks. Sometimes it hides inside ordinary Tuesdays until years later you realize your heart noticed everything long before your mind did. I remembered our sophomore winter when freezing rain had turned every sidewalk into polished glass. I had slipped outside the library carrying far too many books, and before I could lose my balance, Noah had caught my elbow with effortless timing. He laughed, told me I was impossible, then kept walking beside me all the way back to the apartment instead of taking his usual shortcut. I remember junior year when I stayed awake for almost 36 hours finishing a research project. I woke up on the couch covered with the blanket that always belonged to Noah. He never admitted placing it over me. He simply asked the next morning whether I had slept better. I remembered every birthday when he somehow found the exact book I wanted before I even mentioned it. Every stressful exam week when a cup of coffee mysteriously appeared beside my laptop at precisely the moment I needed it most. Every football game where he instinctively stood on the windy side so I would not complain about the cold. Every crowded concert where he quietly positioned himself behind me so no one pushed me around. Every crosswalk where he rested a gentle hand against my shoulder while traffic rushed by, even though I had crossed streets safely my entire life. At the time, I had filed every one of those moments into the folder labeled friendship. Loyal friends noticed little things. Loyal friends cared. Loyal friends stayed. Yet now those same memories shimmered with unfamiliar colors, like photographs developing inside an old darkroom. Had I misunderstood everything before, or was I misunderstanding everything now? My phone buzzed against the hardwood floor, pulling me back into the present. A message from Noah appeared on the screen even though he was only one room away. Found our freshman orientation photo. You still looked terrified. I smiled despite myself and replied, I was terrified. 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, then returned again. You were never alone, though. I stared at those words much longer than I probably should have. Simple sentence. 8 ordinary words, but they settled somewhere deep inside my chest with unexpected weight. Before I could answer, I heard Noah humming softly while taping another moving box shut in his bedroom. The familiar sound floated through the apartment like it had 100 ordinary evenings before, except nothing about tonight felt ordinary anymore. The closer morning came, the more every shared memory seemed to ask the same quiet question. What if the story I had been telling myself for 3 years had never been the whole story at all? The next morning arrived far too quickly, carrying that strange silence that only comes before a goodbye. Sunlight slipped through the apartment blinds, drawing bright lines across the stacked boxes waiting by the front door. Noah was leaving after lunch. Just a few more hours, I reminded myself. A few more ordinary hours before our lives split into different directions on opposite sides of the country. I decided the healthiest thing I could do was stay busy, so I volunteered to return the last set of apartment keys to the leasing office while Noah finished loading his car. It seemed simple enough. 5 minutes there, 5 minutes back.
No complicate the motions. No impossible conversations.
The leasing office sat beside the student housing courtyard, where dozens of recent graduates wandered around saying their final goodbyes. Parents carried luggage. Friends exchanged hugs. Someone played music from a portable speaker. Everything looked cheerful, yet every smile carried the quiet sadness of endings. I handed over the keys, signed the paperwork, and stepped back outside just as my phone vibrated. It was a text from Noah asking whether I could grab the folder containing our lease documents because he had accidentally left it in the office yesterday. I turned around, smiled at his predictable forgetfulness, and walked back inside. The receptionist pointed me toward a storage room where unclaimed paperwork had been collected. As I reached the hallway outside the office, I heard familiar laughter drifting through the partially open door. Noah. Instinctively, I slowed my steps, not because I intended to eavesdrop, but because another voice spoke before I could announce myself. It was Ethan, one of Noah's co-workers from his engineering internship. So, Ethan said with an unmistakable grin in his voice, are you finally going to tell him before you drive away? My heart stopped so completely that even breathing felt dangerous. There was a brief silence, long enough for me to wonder whether I had misunderstood the question. Then Noah let out a quiet sigh. I do not know. His voice sounded nothing like the confident one I heard every day. It was softer, careful. You are running out of time, Ethan replied. You have been running out of time for 3 years. Another pause followed. I stood, frozen in the hallway, the folder completely forgotten. Noah laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You make it sound easy, Ethan answered gently. It is not easy, but pretending forever is harder. My pulse hammered against my ribs. My brain instantly searched for harmless explanations. Maybe they were talking about Seattle. Maybe they were discussing some job opportunity. Maybe the conversation had nothing to do with me at all. Yet deep inside, another possibility quietly lifted its head. Noah spoke again, barely above a whisper. If I tell him and I lose him, I lose the best person who has ever happened to me. Those words settled over the hallway with breathtaking weight. Ethan did not answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice carried the certainty of someone who had watched the story unfold from the outside for years. And if you never tell him, you lose him anyway. I felt rooted to the floor, every memory from the past 4 years rearranging itself faster than I could process. The warm coffee that always appeared when I needed it. The blanket, the concerts, the graduation ceremony, the hand. None of it looked accidental anymore. Before I could hear another word, footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper inside the office. Panic snapped me back to reality. I quietly stepped away from the doorway before either of them could see me, clutching the forgotten folder against my chest, while one impossible thought refused to leave my mind. What if the secret I had protected for 3 years had never belonged to me alone? The drive back to the apartment should have taken less than 10 minutes. Felt like an hour. Every traffic light stayed red just long enough for another memory to surface, another sentence to echo inside my head. If I tell him and I lose him. The words refused to leave me alone. I had imagined 1,000 impossible futures over the past 3 years, but somehow I had never imagined this one. Not because I believed Noah could never feel the same way, but because believing that would have been too dangerous. Hope had always seemed far riskier than disappointment. At least disappointment was familiar. When I finally pulled into the apartment parking lot, Noah was standing beside his packed SUV with the rear hatch open. The last few boxes were already inside. He looked up as soon as he saw my car and smiled with that same quiet warmth that had followed me through 4 years of college. "Did you find the folder?" he asked. I held it up without trusting my voice. "You saved me again," he said with a grateful laugh. I swear I would forget my own head if it was not attached. Normally I would have answered with one of our usual jokes. Normally we would have laughed until one of us accidentally started another conversation about absolutely nothing. Today I simply handed him the folder. He studied my face for a second longer than usual. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. There it was. The question I had been asking myself ever since the hallway outside the leasing office. I could have lied. I almost did. Instead I heard myself say, "Can we take a walk before you leave?" His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not fear, not surprise, more like someone who had been expecting a certain moment for a very long time. "Of course," he answered without hesitation. We left the car exactly where it was and walked toward the small lake behind campus, the place where we had celebrated passing final exams, complained about impossible professors, and once spent an entire evening ranking the worst coffee shops in town. Summer had settled quietly over the water. Ducks drifted near the shore while a light breeze stirred the leaves overhead. For several minutes neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was simply full. Finally Noah stopped near the wooden dock and rested both hands against the railing. He stared across the lake before taking one slow breath. "I have been trying to figure out how to say something for years," he admitted. My heartbeat became impossibly loud. He laughed softly at himself. "Funny, right? I can give presentations to a room full of engineers without being nervous, but talking to you is somehow harder." He looked down for a moment, then back at me with an honesty I had never seen before. "Everyone always assumed I was straight." He smiled sadly. "For a long time, I let them believe it because it was easier than asking myself difficult questions." His voice remained calm, but every word carried the weight of years. Then somewhere between freshman year and junior year, I realized the person I wanted to call first after every good day, and every bad day, was you. The person I looked for in every crowded room was you. The person I could not imagine leaving behind was you. He paused, searching my face as though afraid of what he might find there. I kept telling myself it was just friendship because I was terrified that if I admitted the truth, I would lose the best friend I have ever had. A small, uncertain smile appeared as he shook his head. Then yesterday, when I reached for your hand in that crowd, I realized I did not want to pretend anymore. I only let go because I was afraid you would pull away first. For a moment, neither of us moved. The breeze skimmed across the surface of the lake, carrying the distant laughter of graduates celebrating somewhere beyond the trees. But the world around us seemed to fade into the background. I searched Noah's face, expecting to find uncertainty or regret, yet all I saw was quiet honesty. It was the same face I had trusted through 4 unforgettable years, only now there were no walls left between us. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because my heart had spent so long preparing for rejection that it had no idea what to do with hope. "You thought I would pull away?" I asked softly. Noah gave a small nod. "I convinced myself that was the most likely ending." I shook my head in disbelief. "Noah, I have been in love with you for almost 3 years." The words escaped before I could overthink them. They felt lighter than I imagined, as though they had been waiting patiently for the chance to exist. His eyes widened, and for the first time since I had met him, the confident engineer who always seemed to have an answer looked completely speechless. 3 years, he repeated. Since sophomore year, I admitted with an embarrassed smile. I buried it because everyone believed you were straight. I told myself being your best friend was better than losing you. Noah let out a slow breath and covered his face with one hand for a second before laughing quietly. We are two intelligent college graduates, he said. And somehow we both spent years making the exact same mistake. I laughed with him, feeling the last of my fear dissolve into the warm summer air. Every awkward silence, every almost conversation, every hidden feeling suddenly made perfect sense. We had both been protecting the same friendship while quietly sacrificing our own happiness. Do you remember freshman orientation? Noah asked. When I accidentally took your backpack? You apologized for 20 straight minutes, I answered, and bought me the worst coffee I have ever tasted. He smiled. I was trying to impress you. I raised an eyebrow. You failed. I know, he replied with a grin. Good thing you kept hanging around anyway. We stood there smiling at each other, realizing that so many moments we had remembered differently had actually been leading us toward the same destination all along. The blanket on the couch, the coffee during finals, the endless excuses to spend another hour together. None of it had been random. None of it had belonged to only one of us. Noah took a careful step closer, giving me every opportunity to move away if I wanted. I did not. Instead, I closed the small distance between us. He reached toward me slowly, his expression asking a silent question before his words ever could. May I? He asked. I smiled. You never really needed to ask. His fingers gently found mine again, just as they had during graduation, except this time there was no crowd pushing us together and no confusion hiding the truth. It was a simple, unmistakable choice made by both of us. Our hands fit together naturally, and somehow that ordinary feeling carried more meaning than any dramatic declaration ever could. Noah looked down for a moment, then back into my eyes with the brightest smile I had ever seen. I guess I finally told you, he whispered. I squeezed his hand lightly. And I guess you were never the only one with a secret. Neither of us noticed how much time had passed until my phone buzzed with a message from my mother asking whether we were still coming to dinner. I looked at the screen, then at Noah, and we both started laughing. For years we had imagined impossible conversations that never happened. Now that everything had finally been said, the silence between us felt lighter than any words could have been. You still have a 6-hour drive tomorrow? I reminded him. Noah nodded, but there was a new calm in his eyes. Seattle is still waiting, he said. The difference is that now I know what I am driving toward instead of what I am leaving behind. We walked back across campus together, still holding hands without thinking about it. The afternoon sun had begun to sink lower, painting long shadows across the sidewalks where only a handful of graduates remained. Workers were already folding chairs on the football field. Maintenance crews gathered forgotten programs and decorations. The celebration was ending, yet for me it felt like something far more important had only just begun. As we approached the administration building, we noticed several classmates gathered near the large university sign, taking one final group picture before everyone scattered across the country. Someone spotted us immediately. Adrian, Noah, get over here, another classmate called. We exchanged a quick glance before walking over together. Cameras were passed around, people squeezed shoulder to shoulder, and everyone joked about finally becoming responsible adults. The photographer counted to 3 several times because someone always blinked at the wrong moment. Between photographs, one of our friends looked down at our joined hands and smiled with genuine warmth. About time, she said with an amused laugh. I blinked in surprise. Noah laughed beside me. What do you mean about time? She rolled her eyes playfully. Half the campus thought you two were dating already. The other half kept wondering what was taking so long. A chorus of agreement immediately followed. Someone admitted they had lost a $20 bet because they expected us to figure things out before graduation. Another friend confessed that our study group had stopped trying to set either of us up with anyone else nearly 2 years earlier, because it always felt pointless. I looked at Noah in complete disbelief. We had spent years hiding feelings that apparently everyone except the two of us had quietly noticed. Noah leaned closer and whispered with a grin. I cannot decide whether that makes me feel better or more embarrassed. Definitely both, I whispered back. The photographer called for one last picture. Instinctively, I shifted a little closer to Noah, and without any hesitation he intertwined our fingers again. This time I did not wonder whether it meant anything. I knew exactly what it meant. The camera shutter clicked just as both of us smiled naturally, without pretending, without hiding, without wondering whether we belonged beside each other. When the photographs were finished, our classmates drifted away one by one, waving goodbye and promising future reunions that everyone sincerely hoped would happen. Noah and I remained standing in front of the university sign for another quiet moment. The same campus that had witnessed 4 years of friendship had now become the place where fear finally stepped aside and made room for truth. As we turned toward the parking lot together, our hands remained comfortably linked, not because either of us was afraid of getting lost in the crowd anymore, but because after everything we had finally found exactly where we belonged. 5 years passed more quickly than I ever believed they could. Life did exactly what everyone had promised it would do. It became busy. Noah built an engineering career in Seattle that challenged him every day. I accepted a position as a high school English teacher only a few miles away after discovering that the dream I had been searching for was helping young people find confidence in their own voices. We rented a small apartment overlooking Elliott Bay before eventually buying a modest house with a front porch where we drank coffee every Saturday morning, no matter how packed our schedules became. Some weekends we revisited old photographs from college, laughing at terrible hairstyles, outdated backpacks, and the unbelievable fact that two people could spend years loving each other while remaining completely unaware that the feeling was shared. Every graduation season brought back memories of that afternoon beneath the June sun, but instead of regret, those memories now carried gratitude. Then one spring I received an email from our university inviting me to return as the commencement speaker for the graduating class. I read the message 3 separate times before believing it was real. Noah looked over my shoulder, smiled, and said, "You always did know how to tell a story." On graduation day, we walked across the same campus that had changed both of our lives. The old oak tree still stood proudly near the administration building. The football field looked almost exactly the same. Families filled the stands. Graduates adjusted their caps with nervous excitement. It felt strangely familiar, as though time had folded back on itself for one extraordinary afternoon. When my name was announced, I stepped onto the stage and looked across hundreds of hopeful faces, preparing to begin the next chapter of their lives. I spoke about ambition. I spoke about friendship. I spoke about failure, resilience, and the courage to choose kindness when the future felt uncertain. Then I paused for a moment before sharing the lesson that had taken me the longest to learn. Graduation does not only mean leaving school, I said. Sometimes graduation means leaving fear behind. The greatest opportunities in life are not always the ones waiting in another city or another career. Sometimes they are the conversations we are too afraid to have, the truth we are too afraid to say, or the hand we are too afraid to hold. Do not spend years hiding the best parts of who you are because you are waiting for perfect certainty. Life rarely gives us certainty. It gives us moments, and it asks whether we are brave enough to meet them honestly. The stadium grew wonderfully quiet. I smiled, thanked the graduating class, and stepped away from the podium to warm applause. Waiting near the front row was Noah, watching me with the exact same crooked smile that had first stolen my heart years before. Without thinking, I walked straight toward him. Before hundreds of graduates and their families, I reached for his hand. He smiled even wider as our fingers intertwined naturally, effortlessly, just as they had on the day everything changed. This time, neither of us wondered what it meant. We already knew. Together we walked across the campus that had once witnessed 2 frightened best friends pretending not to love each other. Now it watched 2 confident partners beginning another chapter side by side, proving that sometimes the smallest gesture can quietly change an entire life, and sometimes all it takes to discover where you truly belong is the courage to hold on instead of letting go.